Today we'll be taking a look at this lens here. This is the Canon 35mm F1.4 version 2 L lens by the Canon systems, and it is a EF mount. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions, and today we will take a look at this lens here. This is the Canon 35mm F1.4 version 2 EF mount lens for the Canon system, and you can mount it on the R5 using an adapter as such. You can just put it on the adapter and you can mount it quite perfectly on the R5. So today we'll take a look at this lens here, and before we start, I'll say that in the future I'll be doing a lot of these short reviews, and they are equipment that I only own for a few days. So this is not my equipment. I thank SLR Revolution for loading me this copy, but in the future when I review such equipment, I'll try to make them short and about 10 minutes in terms of review time, so you can have an understanding on how I feel about the equipment itself. Now this lens is something that I only use for 2 photo shoots, and I think that I have some impression of this lens, especially on the Canon R5. Now if you own the Canon R5, you may be looking for a professional 35mm lens, something with weather sealing and something that actually has a better performance. The thing is that if you look at the 35mm F1.8 RF lens, and you can take a look at the review up there, I feel that that lens itself has some issues. Firstly, it's not very sharp, and secondly, the STM motor is not really good. I tried it with action and with tracking by the EOS R5. I find that it is not really that good. The autofocus performance is quite inferior versus the 35mm 1.4 I have here, or even versus the Sigma 1.4 I have here. So if you want something professional, I think this is your best bet still. So let's take a look at this review here and how I feel about the 35mm f1.4 version 2 L lens. Now, in terms of build quality, I would say as is usual, Canon quality is a mixture of plastic and metal with weather sealing. Now, Canon has been in this weather sealing market for some time, and they do a lot of professional lenses. So I think that the weather sealing is trustable, but it's not something I want to try and shoot in very, very heavy rain. The lens is not very heavy, it's not very big. Overall, it's quite a nice size, versus the Sigma. This is massive, and this is quite nice in terms of sizing. So it's quite nice to handle overall. The 35mm version 2 here is of course a OEF lens, so it is mechanically coupled to the autofocus mechanism, and you can actually focus this lens even without having a camera attached, and you can feel the hard points of this focusing mechanism. It is not like the RF lenses that spin infinitely with no hard points. You can feel the hard points of the end of the focus, but you still can turn after that, but you just roughly know where the ending is. The lens uses a 72mm front filter, so not too big, not too small, so it's quite nice and quite affordable to purchase. And there is only a AF/MF switch. Other than that, there is nothing much on this lens itself. It's quite nice to hold, as I say, and overall I think it's quite a nicely built lens for especially an L lens itself. Now, next thing I'll talk about is handling in the field. And handling in the field, I can say as it is quite nice to handle. Let me mount on my R5 and show you. Okay. Now, with the R5 and the 35mm, I can handhold easily with one hand. It's not something I can do with the 40mm. This 40mm is massive, and I said earlier in my review, it is quite tiring to handhold this 40mm with the R5 with one hand. Well, the 35mm is just nice. It's about 800 plus grams. And not only that, the weight of the lens itself is quite okay also, because if you actually hold the lens, the weight of the lens is in the bottom part of the lens, not the top of the lens. So it's not too front heavy, and with the R5, it balances out pretty much nicely on your hand, and you can actually quite safely hold with one hand itself. In terms of autofocus performance, I feel that it is very similar to any of the EF lenses I've tried so far. Considering that this is the native EF lens itself, the hit rate is about 95 to 98%, very similar to the Sigma, which means out of 100 over shots, maybe I have 1 or 2 softer shots and maybe 1 out of focus at times. But overall, I think that the autofocus performance is pretty much okay when it comes to accuracy and tracking. The one thing that to note is that the 35mm here has a much faster initial acquisition compared to the Sigma. You can really see that it jumps straight away to the focus point versus a Sigma that actually racks through for a little bit of time. But when it comes to tracking itself and following the subject and accuracy, it is about the same between these two lenses. So that's something to note. If you want a slightly faster initial acquisition, I think the 35mm f1.4 version 2 does it slightly better. And the last thing on top is IBs, and IBs wise, I think it's very similar to the Sigma. I'll say this may be slightly better. At 110, you get about 60% sharpness and hit rate, but at when it comes to real world performance, I find that you can shoot this at 130 or 120, while the Sigma you cannot go below 140 for whatever reason. Maybe it's the weight, maybe it's front heavy, or maybe the Canon system just doesn't like Sigma lens as much, but definitely you can handhold the 35mm here for about half to 1 stop more than the Sigma itself, and that is my personal experience. Okay, just to note that there is the Tamron 35mm in the market, and the Tamron 35mm in the market doesn't even work with the R5 IBs today. And you can actually look at the firmware, the firmware announcement. They have not launched a firmware for the Tamron yet, so that is something that you must take note if you want to buy third-party lenses. The Sigma does work pretty okay, as I said, but it just doesn't stabilize as much as the 35mm 1.4 here. Overall, I think that in terms of handling IAF and IBs, I come to expect this out of a first-party lens still. It is not an RF mount ultimately, but it's still pretty okay. Now, versus an RF lens, however, I say the RF lens is still superior when it comes to autofocus. When I say RF lens, I say the professional RF, like such as the 50mm or the 85mm, it does have better acquisition, better accuracy, and of course the IS work a lot better on the RF lenses versus the EF mount. Easily half a stop to one stop better in terms of IS, and easily 99% hit rate on the RF lenses. In fact, the RF lens I have yet to fail to focus using the RF mount, short of user error. Okay, the last thing I'll talk about is image quality, and I only use it for 2 shoots and did some synthetic tests on it, so I have some opinions on what this lens is in terms of optical performance. Now, this lens, if you ask me to summarize it, is a decent performer for a 35mm f1.4. Now, Canon uses something called blue optics in this lens, and it's also used in the RF 85mm, and it does show the results that this lens have quite low chromatic aberration throughout the entire lens, be it in the center or the corner. I'll say it's quite comparable to Sigma. The Sigma may be slightly better in the corner, but overall, in terms of CA, this lens is quite similar, quite good throughout the entire range, and this itself will put it better than the Sigma 35mm 1.4, the old Sigma 35mm 1.4, because that thing has quite a lot of CA, and most other lenses in this world that has 1.4 have quite a lot of CA too. Then in terms of sharpness itself, I would say as this Canon lens is quite good overall. The center region is very good, the mid region is decent, but the corner itself is really not as great, however. Now, the Sigma 40mm 1.4 is a very good performer all the way to the corner, but the same cannot be said for the 35mm. And at the corner, you can see that there is certain amount of softness itself. Now, is that softness really a big deal? It depends on what you do with it, but you can really see a softness, and it's not to do with plain curvature, because I tried to refocus at the corner, it still doesn't beat the Sigma itself. So that is definitely something to note. Overall wise, as I said, the image quality is okay for 35mm. It is very low in CA. The sharpness is very good in the center. The sharpness is good in the mid region, just not so great at the corners themselves. Now, in terms of bokeh wise, I would say the 35mm 1.4 is okay, nothing too spectacular, same as the Sigma 40mm 1.4, because they are not very long lenses. And if you really want bokeh, get the 50mm 1.2 or the 85mm 1.2. Those things bokeh a lot more than the 35mm. But if you want just some decent separation, this lens will still give it. As you can see some of the photos here, it still kind of give you that 35mm separation when you need it. Okay, so that is so much for image quality. In the end of the day, should you buy this lens or not? Now, if you are looking for 35mm professional lens with weather sealing, with decent optical performance and nice to hold, I think this lens is still the best. Because the Tamron still has the firmware issue, I cannot recommend the lens, and the Sigma is just massively, insanely heavy versus the 35mm itself. So if you ask me between this lens and Sigma, and you had the money to burn, you may want to consider this lens because it's a lot easier to hold with one hand and maneuver around. And ultimately, this is still a Canon lens, so you won't have compatibility in the issue like the Tamron itself have some compatibility issue now. Sigma has been known to have compatibility issue over the years, but they can be patched and upgraded in firmware. However, Canon lens will never have such problem, and if you are intending to stay in the Canon system for a long time, this is still your better bet. Now, that's to say that the pricing of this 35mm is quite high. In Singapore, it's over 2,000, while you can actually get this at 1.5 and the Tamron at about 1.2. So this lens is very, very expensive. Now, if you get second hand, it's quite affordable. It's 1.6, 1.4. It depends on the age of the lens. But first hand of this lens, you really should consider third party whenever you can. Now, if you look at the US pricing, this is also not cheap. I think it's 1.8 or 1.9K USD versus this at 1.4K or 1K at certain offer, and a Tamron at 900. You really have to ask yourself, do you want first party Canon? Do you mind full compatibility in the future? And do you just want the red ring? Because that is what Canon is all about. Other than that, I think that this lens is still okay though. If you get second hand, definitely is worth. If you get first hand, do consider third party lenses because they do provide you certain improved options, especially when it comes to image quality on the modern lenses themselves. If not, I hope you enjoyed this short little review. I try to keep it below 10 minutes as I said, and if you like this review, do like and subscribe. In the future, I'll do more of such really short reviews to really share my opinion on certain equipment that I currently loan for a few days. I hope you enjoy this, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Oh yeah, I just want to add one last thing to this review itself, and it's something I just noticed. Is that when you use the Canon EF lenses to focus, you can get the entire focusing range on the R5. When the Sigma, there is a little bit, you can't go all the way to the corner. It may matter to you, it may not matter to you, but that is something to note, and you should actually consider it when you actually purchase such a lens, because you may want that corner focusing mechanism or the corner tracking, and this lens will provide it, unlike the Sigma. This Sigma just doesn't focus all the way to the corner. I have no idea why, but that's like it. And that's about it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.